Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I am here to talk to you about a mysterious film that I saw as a child, which seems to have vanished. That's it. There's a mysterious film I saw as a child, and I have no idea where it is, how to locate it, if it even still exists. And I'm just going to kind of tell you the story of it, both how I came to view it the first and only time, and the little bits of information I received about it later in life. I'm sure some of you read about the creepypasta about this show called Candle Cove. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like there was this weird thing I remember, but nobody else seems to remember it. And it was just like, well, let me tell you the story. I'll tell you the story. So this was the 6th grade. I was in the 6th grade. So sometime in late 93 or early 94, because I graduated from the 6th grade in 1994, and I was at King Middle School in Portland, Maine. One of my teachers, at one point, she says, if X amount of people in this class get this grade before the end of the term, I will screen an independent film for you that a friend of mine made. I said, oh, well, I've never seen an independent film. I don't even really know what an independent film is in the 6th grade. And one day, a couple months later, she wheels in the cart with the TV on it. You know those carts that public schools have? They have the TV, they have a VCR. At least in my day, they had a VCR. And it also had a Laserdisc player. I remember being very impressed that it had a Laserdisc player. She says that her friend made this movie. She puts in the VHS tape and we watch it. It was really, really low budget, probably no budget. Definitely shot on videotape and not film. Cheesy. If you had like a Doc Brown mad scientist with a crazy lab, whatever he's doing results in a lobster growing really big and coming out of Casco Bay and attacking Portland, Maine, essentially. So it was like a giant lobster attacking Portland, Maine. One other scene I remember very specifically, and this was probably my first sort of realization of just how magical filmmaking can be. In Portland, the center of the city is an office building called One City Center. It was built, I think it might have been built in the 70s or 80s, but inside One City Center, there are these escalators. And then on the other side of town, there's an old lighthouse called Portland Observatory. The Portland Observatory is located at 138th Congress Street in Portland. And so, and I remember the main characters walking into the Portland Observatory, and then it cuts to the escalators at One City Center. And I'm like, wow, it didn't occur to me that you could do that. They're essentially making the interior of the lighthouse a massive office building. That was magical to me. In the 6th grade, like as a filmmaker today, I've done stuff like that plenty of times. It's kind of common practice, but when you're in the 6th grade and you're watching your first independent film ever, that's magical. We watched this movie. It's pretty cheesy. The only person I remember being affiliated with it at all was a popular DJ named Mark Persky. Mark Persky was the morning DJ host when I was growing up for the classic rock station in Portland, Maine, WBLM 102.9. Probably one of the most famous people in Maine as far as I'm concerned. But that was it. And then I forgot about the movie for years. In 2000, I make my first feature film while I'm still a senior in high school. It's called 16 Stories. And Mark Persky did some voiceover work for me for it. I actually wrote him, and I'm like, well, I have these scenes where somebody's listening to a morning show, and I would love it if you could do it. And he's like, all right, send me the script. I sent him the script, and Mark and his co-host Brett Slater at the time basically used WBLM Studios and recorded for my student feature film a professional level radio voiceover. I'm like, that's great.
Good morning. Does anyone ever think about how strange it is the year 2005 is coming our way in like 16 hours?
I don't think anyone does. Why do you ask?
Well, I remember about 10 years ago when I started, everyone was under the impression that by this time we'd all be driving flying cars. It's kind of a crazy thought.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that because my wife made a comment last night about flying cars. She said, do you think anyone's figured out a safe and easy way to make cars fly?
What'd you say?
I told her to go back to bed.
I kept moving on with my life, and then in 2009, I called him again. I figured out how to contact him. And I said, I'm making another film. The whole thing is structured around these two girls sitting in their apartment, essentially listening to news radio as a missile is descending on the city. So they're essentially waiting to die, and there's this radio host that's just telling them what to expect.
More news on the vessel destroyed in the North Atlantic by U.S. and Canadian forces. Authorities can confirm that the vessel released a missile of some sort just before being sunk. The Pentagon has advised that anyone who can find protective shelter should head to their destination with as many of their friends and family as possible.
And he recorded that as well. And I remember with my initial phone call with him, I'm saying, hey, do you remember doing this independent film about a lobster that comes out of the water and attacks the city of Portland? And he said, yeah, it's called Lobster Roy. Lobster Roy. I didn't remember that. Okay. So do you know where I could see this film? He had no idea. He didn't have a copy. He doesn't know who did. And according to that conversation, apparently the guy who made the movie was in prison, at least at the time that we had that conversation. If you haven't guessed by now, I really want to see this movie. I want to revisit it. I'm sure it won't live up to the expectations I've painted in my mind about it. You know, it reminds me of that How I Met Your Mother episode where, like, they're talking about this pizza place that one of the characters went to when he first moved to New York, and it was the best pizza he ever had. And when he finally finds that pizza place again, he has a slice of pizza there, and it's like, ugh, this is nothing. And basically the story is, well, it tasted great back then because that was his first meal in New York. And when you're buying your first meal after moving to New York City, it's always going to taste great for the most part. And I think that my first independent film experience kind of grows in my mind as this great experience because it was my first independent film that I ever saw. And I don't expect it to live up to the hype in my brain, but at the same time, I really don't like this idea of this movie getting lost. I want to see this movie. Better yet, I want to buy this movie and I want to distribute it. So, if anyone knows anything about this film, Lobster Roy, reach out to me. If you're the filmmaker and you happen to not be in prison, or maybe you are in prison and you have access to the internet, which I seriously doubt. But if you're a filmmaker or one of the filmmakers, reach out to me. Because even if we can't locate the film, certainly there are people who can tell stories about what it was like to make it and maybe fill in some holes, you know, some memory holes that I have, some gaps in the memory. But this mysterious movie made in Portland, Maine, Lobster Roy. One other fact is the teacher that screened it lived on Peaks Island, Maine at the time. I don't recall her name either, but for the investigators out there on the internet, let's get this done. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you on the next video.
Good morning, listeners. For those of you who haven't heard, there was a horrible elevator accident at the Royal Crown apartment building last night after the fireworks display.
Does anyone know how it happened?
All three people in the elevator were found dead. Authorities suspect that one of the persons managed to cut the elevator cables only because a gun was found on the floor, which means they were possibly fighting.
This could be the start of a weird year.
Yep, but you know something, as time progresses, we're all going to find situations that go on in this large city make no sense. That's how it is, and
Grace,
see.
can we get someone in here to fix my fucking blinds?